In order for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock to truly be a success, it needed not only a great storyline, but also special effects to match it. And in today's episode of Backtrek, we'll take a look at them. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this, the continuation of our look into Star Trek's history, we'll be taking a look at the special effects side of the making of Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. I hope you enjoy. Star Trek II's special effects had been a spectacular success, and as a result, the Paramount powers that be decided to once again use industrial light and magic to bring the ships to life. Having not only delivered excellent-looking visual effects, along with groundbreaking new technological developments in the field, ILM had become the logical choice for one simple reason: they came in on budget. And so, hired on, the work began. There were many major components of this film, but one of the most important was that of the 6 new space models that would be featured in this movie. Those, of course, were the USS Excelsior, the USS Grissom, the Klingon Bird of Prey, the Merchant Vessel, the Orbital Shuttle, and of course, Earth Space Dock. Normally, a film's own production team would sketch out several designs to run by the directors and producers, narrowing them down sketch by sketch, but this was not the case for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. Instead, Nimoy allowed a very different approach to take place, letting industrial light and magic design the space models. And so, David Carson and Nilo Rodis Jamero would head up the task of bringing these models to life. Because of this different approach, many different mock-up versions were created for each filming model. Some of the different potential Excelsior-class models are pretty wild. After creating various sketches for these models, these sketches would then be turned over to the model makers Steve Galley and Bill George, and their team, who would then whip up what is known as a study model, and they themselves were invited to use their own imaginations to add to these study models and make them better. Then these models would be presented to Harve Bennett and Leonard Nimoy, who would give them a stern looking over, picking what they liked or didn't like, discarding some models entirely, and through this process, eventually all ships and the space dock would come to life, being used in Trek production after Trek production all the way through the TNG era of Star Trek. The original story for Star Trek III would have seen the Romulans as being the main antagonists of the movie, and so the team were really excited to design a new Romulan vessel. Drawing on the original series Bird of Prey design, Nilo and David made the starship look even more bird-like and menacing than anyone could ever hope for. So great was the design that for a while, even after it was decided to be the Klingons as the big baddies for the movie, the script would have had Krug steal a Romulan vessel, hence keeping the vessel's name and heritage intact. Unfortunately, however, in the interest of keeping the movie flowing and not too convoluted, this point would be dropped and the Bird of Prey would become a staple of Klingon starship for the rest of Star Trek's lifetime. The intricate, final practical model of the Klingon Bird of Prey incorporated built-in motors that allowed the wings to sweep up or down. These motors, however, became tricky to use, and as a result, the wings were seldom moved from a slightly elevated position when used in the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. That is, of course, until the CGI model was created, and then suddenly, the Bird of Prey would get its full range of motion back once again. For the Bird of Prey's interior, Leonard Nimoy himself laid out the conditions for what it should look like. As he recalls, "The interior of the Klingon ship was to be the opposite of what the Enterprise always was. The Enterprise was always rather clean and pristine. The idea for the Klingon ship was that it should be grungy, it should be oily, it should be greasy, dirty, very mechanical, very clunky. Big metal parts that you had to work around, and it could hurt you if you bumped into them. It should make different noises, the ship should groan and creak in a way that the Enterprise never would." This advice would prove to lay the groundwork for all future Klingon ships and their aesthetics, though this particular interior design, as seen in the movie, would not be seen again, even though the same Klingon bird of prey was to feature in the next movie. The Oberth-class USS Grissom would show a slightly different side of Starfleet's starship design. Being a pure science vessel, the Oberth-class would be much smaller, but would include a massive sensor array attached via its pylons. This in itself still causes problems today, as later iterations of Trek would treat this sensor array as a secondary hull, even having blueprints or MSDs of the ship showing up on screen, thus making the secondary hull canon. You see, the problem was twofold. First, there really is no way to get from the saucer section to the secondary hull, and this ship design broke Roddenberry's self-imposed rule of how and where starship nacelles should be. The second problem tends to be easily overlooked by most fans, as they can accept that Roddenberry sometimes merely said things as a way to keep control over some aspects of Star Trek. But the first one is a real problem. And although those same blueprints do include a turboshaft running through each pylon, there really is no way that could work whatsoever thanks to the starship's size itself. And so when it comes to the Oberth class, fans just have to accept all the contrary canon information and suspend their disbelief entirely, just believing that there is a way. The merchant ship and orbital shuttle would also become used and reused throughout Star Trek's history, having pieces added, subtracted, and changed to make them a different alien ship of the week. David and Nilo wanted something very different and very special for the space dock, and both men racked their brains trying to figure it out. As David recalls, "I was trying to work out how we could make this space station interesting, and I thought, what if it was so big that the Enterprise actually goes into it? I did a drawing of the space station that was big enough. It was a bit clunky, but Nilo took that and in his typical fashion turned it into a really wonderful design." To give a sense of size for the dock's interior, the men would come up with the idea of including a large group of windows, where people could look out and watch the Enterprise pull into her new parking spot. Adding lights not only to light the starships entering the space dock, but as well to appear as tiny windows in the background, also helped the audience get a true sense of scale in regards to this particular model. But of course, the models weren't the only special effects in this movie. Two other really big ones had to be completed: that of the Genesis planet and its destruction, as well as the sad loss of the USS Enterprise. Stage 15 was chosen to construct the Genesis planet set that Kirk would fight Commander Krug on. To get the desired dire circumstances our heroes faced, the set was actually constructed with a lot of pyrotechnics, as well as great jutting rocks that, when needed, on cue, would surge from the ground, adding to the menacing nature of this planet's destruction. Plans were drawn up, the sets built to specification, and all seemed well. That is, until the jutting rocks that were supposed to begin jutting, instead of forcefully making their way out of the supposed planet's ground, they then rose very nonchalantly, not seeming menacing in the least. Attempt after attempt was made to get this right, but sadly very few of them worked at all. Being the movie's fight scene was the climax for the movie, and the fight had been planned around these jutting rocks, everyone was at a loss as to what to do, and so William Shatner, stepping up to the plate in true Jim Kirk style, pulled Christopher Lloyd aside and together hatched out a Kirk fight scene, drudging up some of the good captain's old original series moves, and the scene went on film, though it would be one of Nimoy's biggest regrets about the movie, since he had envisioned something far more spectacular than a Kirk chop could ever achieve. There was one rock, however, that did cooperate with the team, and so that one jutting boulder would be added into the fight scene, and would propel Krug into the actual fight, and give our hero captain an opportunity to win the battle. Another interesting tidbit in regards to the Genesis planet was that most of the planet's destruction, the burning trees, the ground ripping apart itself, was achieved by the use of a small miniature. With this little model, the Genesis planet could be burned alive without any harm to the actors whatsoever, compositing them into the shot later on. The Enterprise's destruction was a bit more complex to achieve, as of course no one wanted to actually blow up the model. First, it should be noted that filming of this sequence was primarily done upside down. That's because in space there is of course no gravity, so hanging whatever model needs to be destroyed upside down solved this gravitational dilemma. An interesting little bit of Trek trivia for you is that Industrial Light and Magic actually used a stock explosion from Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back in the Enterprise's destruction sequence. Who says that Star Trek and Star Wars aren't connected? The model of the Enterprise was a constant source of headaches for ILM. As Martin Brennis recalls, the lighting system in the Enterprise was obviously done by a model maker who really knew nothing about electricity. I and a couple of other model makers had to do some rewiring in order to at least make it safe. It was too much work to completely rewire it, however, but we patched the bits that were really hazardous so we could use it. Another complication was that all the lights were sealed inside the ship, so if even one was damaged, the entire model would have to be taken apart to repair that light bulb. To achieve the Enterprise's destruction, ILM would construct various enlarged sections of the Enterprise hull. This included the bridge module and 2 close-up sections of the upper saucer section. For the bridge explosion sequence, the team did just that, exploded the bridge module mock-up. And to represent the destroyed bridge on the actual physical model, the team merely painted the bridge and its dome black, reasoning that no one would be able to tell if it was still intact on the film, as it would match the black starry background being used. For the Enterprise's registry being eaten away, the team used a light styrofoam mock-up and dripped acetone on it. This would cause the eating away effect. Then for the saucer section's explosion, ILM created a ceramic mock-up, using talcum powder on the inside to simulate a larger material explosion, and again blew that up. This was then superimposed over the actual filming model, and the effect was brilliant. And finally, to get that lovely sparking effect in what was left of the Enterprise as she spirals into the Genesis surface, ILM simply packed one of their mock-ups with steel wool, and lit that steel wool on fire. After researching all these special effects and how they were accomplished, it really gives you an appreciative perspective on how talented these people truly are. The special effects for this movie are an amazing feat, and still to this day, look wonderful. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock would net Paramount a hefty box office of around $87 million, or about $217 million in today's money, and because of that, it was guaranteed there would be a 4th film in the movie franchise. And in our next Star Trek Historical Overview episode of Backtrek, we'll take a look at the making of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home and all the problems that surrounded the making of that film. We'll see you then. Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrek. What do you think of Star Trek III: The Search for Spock special effects? What's your favorite model introduced in this movie? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel out with its special effects? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.